Paul had always been a sucker for old things. Old cars, old clothes, old books, you name it. So when he saw an old chair at the flea market, he couldn't help but take a second look. At first glance, it looked like any other old chair. It was made of dark wood and had a faded blue cushion, but something about it just drew Paul in. Maybe it was the way the light hit the wood, making it glisten ever so slightly. Or maybe it was the faint sound of laughter he could have sworn he heard coming from the chair. Whatever it was, Paul couldn't take his eyes off the chair. He walked up to it slowly, as if afraid that if he moved too quickly, the moment would be broken. His fingers brushed against the cool surface of the wood, and he felt a jolt of electricity shoot up his arm. He pulled his hand back quickly, as if burned, and looked at it as if expecting to see sparks flying. Nothing. As he stood there frozen, Paul couldn't shake off the feeling that this chair was somehow special. He turned to leave, but then stopped short. He turned back to the chair and sat down on it, and that's when things got interesting. The chair creaked and groaned as if in protest, but Paul ignored it. He closed his eyes and leaned back, and that's when he heard it. A voice, raspy and weak, whispered in his ear, "Who are you?" Paul's eyes shot open. He looked around wildly, but there was no one there. The voice had come from the chair. Paul stumbled out of the seat and stared at it in disbelief. Was he going crazy? Had he been sitting in the sun too long and finally cracked under the pressure? Or was the chair really talking to him? Before he could dwell on it more, a man with a kind face and twinkling eyes approached him. "That chair, is it giving you trouble?" he asked, his voice as warm as honey. Paul turned to him, startled. "How did you know?" he exclaimed. The man smiled knowingly. "I've been watching you," he said. "You seem like an honest man, Paul, and I trust you'll take good care of her." Paul was still confused, but he trusted the man's sincerity. So when the man offered to sell him the chair, he readily agreed. As they carried the chair out of the market, Paul couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had found something truly special, something that whispered stories from another time. When he got home and placed the chair in his living room, he realized he had no idea how to clean it or restore it. But he didn't want to do that anyway. He liked the scratches and the faded fabric. They were part of the chair's history, part of its story. And stories, Paul knew, were the most precious things we had. He sat down in the chair and closed his eyes, listening to the creaking of the old wood. It was a sound that brought him peace, a sound that made him feel connected to all those who had sat in the chair before him. He could almost hear their laughter and feel their presence surrounding him. Then, one day, Paul had visitors. They were friends of his who had come over to play board games. As they crowded into his living room, one of them sat down on the chair without a second thought. Paul's heart skipped a beat. He had forgotten that other people would be reacting to the chair. His friend let out a loud burp and shifted uncomfortably in the seat. "This chair sucks," he complained, and Paul's heart sank. Was that it? Was the chair's power limited to just making people uncomfortable? He had hoped for something more, something magical. But then, as his friends began to leave, one of them turned back to the chair. "Hey, you wouldn't happen to know anything about the previous owner, would you?" she asked, and Paul shook his head. "I don't know anything about her," he admitted. "All I know is that she loved to read mysteries. Her favorite author was Agatha Christie." The woman smiled mysteriously. "Well, then I guess it makes sense that she'd leave us a little mystery of our own." She gestured towards the chair. "What do you mean?" Paul asked, confused. The woman sat down on the chair and closed her eyes. "Oh, nothing," she said with a sly smile. "Just saying goodbye." When Paul turned to leave, he heard the unmistakable sound of the chair speaking again. "Wait, don't go," the voice rasped. "I want to tell you a story." Paul froze in his tracks and slowly turned back to the chair. "What story?" he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. The chair rumbled like a giant, ancient beast, and the woman in the seat opened her eyes, now glowing with an eerie green light. "The story of how I came to be," she began, her voice echoing through the room. "The story of my life." As Paul listened, he realized that the chair wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a vessel of memories, a keeper of secrets. With every word the chair spoke, Paul felt a connection to the woman who had owned it before him. He learned about her dreams and her fears, her joys and her sorrows. He saw the world through her eyes and felt her emotions as if they were his own. And as the hours passed, Paul felt himself changing. He became more empathetic, more compassionate, more understanding. He realized that the chair had a power over him that went beyond just telling stories. It had the ability to transform him, to make him a better person. But as the first rays of dawn peeked through the window, the woman in the chair suddenly vanished, leaving Paul alone in the room. For a moment, he felt a surge of panic. Where had she gone? Was he ever really connected to her? Or had it all been a dream? As he sat there contemplating, the chair began to speak again. "Don't worry, Paul," it said in the same raspy voice. "She's not gone. She's just resting. And when someone worthy sits in my seat, she will return." Paul's heart skipped a beat. Did that mean he was chosen to sit in the chair? To carry on the woman's story? To be her voice? He looked at the chair in awe. It wasn't just an old piece of furniture. It was a legacy. He sat down on the edge of the seat and closed his eyes. "Tell me your story," he whispered. And as the chair rumbled around him, Paul felt a sense of purpose fill him. He knew that he wasn't just listening to a story. He was taking on a responsibility to keep the past alive, to honor the memories of those who had come before him. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Paul lost himself in the tales of the mysterious woman who had once sat in his chair. He didn't know where the story would lead him, but he was ready to follow. After all, he was no longer just Paul, the man who bought an old chair at a flea market. He was Paul, the keeper of memories, the teller of tales, the one who sat in the extraordinary chair. From that day on, Paul's life was never the same. The chair became the center of his world, and he took great pride in being its caretaker. People from all over came to him, hoping to hear the stories that the chair had to tell. And each time someone sat in the chair, Paul felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that he was part of something bigger than himself, that he was helping to keep the memories of countless people alive.